lot of great professionals in this field. One of the best is my friend Chris Pegg, who's a senior ecologist with the Colorado program, also with the Mongolia program. And Chris has been working in Mongolia for a half dozen years now. And he's here to visit with you a little bit about the conservation challenges and the Nature Conservancy's involvement in the grasslands of Mongolia. So welcome Chris Pegg, if you would.
Thank you. Got off pretty easily that time. Usually when Rob introduces me for something, I gotta watch out. Well, I'm lucky. I came up in Virginia, so this humidity is nothing new to me. However, almost 24 years ago, I moved into Colorado, and it was a very different world, but I never will figure out how a kid from that humid, bald cypress swamp, longleaf pine woodlands ever got associated with grasslands. But I love them, and I love the arid grasslands the best of all, and so I've been really lucky that the Colorado chapter has supported where we think it's something beneficial both ways. Several of our staff members working in other places, and among those, Mongolia is right there. And in fact, given to me recently by some of my Mongolian friends, I know that you can all read that this says Mongolian. Well, clearly I'm not. And so I do want to say right off the bat that I am representing some of the finest colleagues that I've ever worked with, the most committed and dedicated and inspiring. And even if that was all I got out of it, was just the inspiration, it's unbelievable to me. So I hope to share some of that with you. And what I'm going to talk about is the history of this program, because this month, 10 years ago, we did our first presentation to the federal agency about conservation in Mongolia and how they could think differently about it. So that's what this is about. It's a pretty amazing place. Now, what I want to start with to kind of do a setting, because I don't really say this in the presentation, is imagine 5 Kansases put together, it doesn't matter what shape, and walking across it and never hitting a fence. And you could walk across the entire length of that and cross 2 railroad tracks and 3 paved roads, unless you went through the capital city. Now, there's only about 3 million people in the whole country. 800,000 of them are herders. And we hear that they're nomadic herders, and they do move around. It's not quite true nomadism, like the gazelle that I'll show you a picture of. But it's pretty amazing when you think about this, because all the rest of them live in a few cities. Most of them live in the capital city, and it's not pretty there. But it is getting very wealthy because of mineral development. I mean, it's been so far away from everything for so long. But when the prices have finally come up and the supplies have gone down in the rest of the world, all of a sudden, between Russia and China now is a very big interest. And when Russia and China are interested, the United States is interested, right? So it's a really interesting political, social system, and the natural ecology is being challenged, but all the pieces are still there. So that's kind of the introduction. And so I just call this big, bold, and inspirational, because that's what a few people in Mongolia, the staff, and I'll show you pictures of the key staff conservation biologists that are working on this. The Nature Conservancy and several other institutions a number of years ago did an assessment of the major habitat types on Earth. So grasslands, tropical forests, temperate forests, etc. And the color of this represents the degree to which some kind of security and conservation is there. So high conservation in general comes in some of these areas. Effective conservation, meaning probably national forest, there's management plans, lots of protected areas, private lands are managed for sustainability. But look where all the red is. Now there's a lot of reasons for that, but if you look, the grasslands are really being challenged around the world. And so in response to that, which by the way is always comforting as a scientist when you know your organization actually responds, we created or recreated or built programs in all of those major grassland areas. Now, there was one other major grassland area in the world, but that's where wheat farming first developed. And so the grasslands of Asia-Europe border are basically all gone. So that's why, if you know your biogeography, we're not playing there. And that's also, though, why you've got representation across the globe, grasslands, in this symposium, which is, by the way, the first one of its kind for the Nature Conservancy, and it's rarely done in the world, and it's really a pleasure to see grasslands biologists and conservationists and interested people get together on it. So, very happy about that. You know, we tend to think of grazing livestock here as a challenge. It's a production, it's a conservation issue, it's a threat to biodiversity. It's all these things have been discussed. The interesting thing is, when you're working in Mongolia, they've been doing it for thousands of years. All right, so all that goes away, all that conversation goes away. This is their lifestyle. It's what they do all the time. This is how they make a living. When they look out of that tent and they see that, that's it. That is their income, their food, their fiber. It's everything. There's a few changes. They buy canvas for their tents sometimes now when they can raise enough money. That's the kitchen in the summer. Okay? She rules the tent. And so I know people, yurts, and in Mongolia they're called ger, but it's the same thing, all right? Basically the same structure. So that is everything to them. If they want to buy a book to send their kid to school, which is not here, they send them away for the entire school season to a little town, they sell a goat, or a sheep, or the wool, or something, all right? So that's, think of that. In the morning, you don't look at your belongings because they've got to fit in the cart to pull away in a few weeks because they're nomads. They're herders that have to move around like this. And that's all dictated by the distribution of the water because they don't have wells dug all over the country like we've done. I'm not arguing good or bad on that. I'm just saying that their distribution of water is what limits where they can graze and where they can't graze in the summer. In the winter, all the livestock eat snow. They can move anywhere they want, and they spread out into those other lands. It's long traditions, and my first trip to Mongolia in 2005, that was one of the first things I saw out in the field. And it was pretty impressive to me, again, a Virginia boy, when we saw something like that when I was a kid, we knew there was trouble coming to town. But this is still ongoing in this country. I'll show you in a little bit, it's changed form a little bit. But basically, Mongolians, depending on where you are, and this is in the northern part of the country where the precipitation's a little bit higher, but you might, in this case, move 3 times a year. You pack everything up, it takes about 3-4 hours, pack it all in that, and you'll go 20-30 miles away to whatever other grazing land you're going to use. If you're in the Gobi Desert, where it's much drier, you might move as much as 21 times a year. Think about that. Picking up everything you have, putting it in the trailer, and going to a place. 20 times, 21 times a year. It's also a place where wildlife still exists. This is one of the only Asian antelope. There used to be a lot more antelope in Asia in big herds. But the Mongolian gazelle, the last 1.2 million of them live in Mongolia. They don't like fences and highways and railroads, all right, so they have a challenge with that. But they have no fences, no highways, and they still go around here. Now they're declining, there's poaching problems. The China meat market and medicine market is taking its toll, but there's still about 1 million of them, and they do move, and you can't tell. You can put radio collars on these animals and you can find them 300 kilometers away in 2 weeks. They move, and there's nothing to stop them. There's also the Wolski Horse, or the top, is the way they would say that, and that wild horse was almost extinct. In the 1950s, the last were shot in the wild. They were put into zoos, fortunately, because that's where we got them after World War II. Most of them were almost killed in all the bombing raids, but they found enough, they got enough now, and there are 3 populations in the world that have been released back in the wild, and this is one. You can still go see that, along with many other wildlife species. And then wild ass populations, the Poonam is another species. Again, these are grazing animals that whole society evolved with. they developed with, they came up with, and they raised their livestock with, they are in some sense compatible. All right, there's some other challenges there. I don't want to oversell that point because where there's a market and a need, there's also a challenge. But you look at that landscape, and I think Bob Hamilton would like this picture because there's not a tree in it. And there's a lot of that out there where there's no trees in it. But things have changed, and they changed rather suddenly. In 2005, there was a government in place. It's a parliamentary system. It was elected parliament. And all of a sudden, that particular Ministry of Nature and Environment leased out 44% of the country to mineral and oil and gas rights. All right, that's pretty impressive, big lease. Now, it was a lease to explore, not develop, and they're still working through that. But that is a pretty big system to work with. Now, let's see, the green spots on here are the protected areas. So you can see they didn't always avoid, or certainly didn't avoid getting right next to the protected areas. There's one other, I don't remember whether I have a slide to show this, but when the government was formed in 1992, when the Russians left, and it was called a quiet revolution because the Mongolian people said it's time for you to go now. And that had been since the 30s. And so they did. And they just really literally left. But with that went the entire culture and support system that they had that whole generation had become accustomed to. But one of the first things they did, because they come from a herder culture, is say, we want 30% of our country to be in protected areas. That's pretty impressive. 30%. Now, not all of it is wilderness national park style protection. It's various things, but that's a pretty impressive area. And I'll tell you more about some statistics on that. Other things that are changing very fast. This is the edge of the Gobi Desert, and 35, 40 years ago, this used to be nice grasslands. It's not anymore, and there's a lot of challenges going on. The way that grazing is done, I'll talk a little more about that. But climate has changed. You know, whether I'm not trying to talk about anything about climate change other than it has actually changed. There's more drought. The rainfall is less predictable. The winter storms are more violent. They have what's called a zud, and a zud will all of a sudden, the temperature might be 45 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, nice balmy day in the early spring there, and then all of a sudden the wind will come up, the rain starts, it gets 100-mile-an-hour winds, and the temperature drops to minus 20, minus 30. In the one that I came in about 2 weeks after, 14 children died because they do most of the herding, and they can't get to cover fast enough when the temperature changed sometime. And 65,000 head of livestock died. And that was only one state or one county, equivalent of a county for us. So really challenging times for people. But it is true, this traditional system still lives. And you look at this, it's a little far, it's as close, right at the edge of the Gobi Desert. Camel herds, there's still work animals for camels there. That is the home, that's everything they own, right there. And there is a herder. There was a herder not too far away, a young man, with sheep, goats, cattle, and horses. That's the primary things. You go a little farther north, you've all heard about yak. It's in the northern part of the country. Yak don't do well when it's really hot. So in the southern part of the country, they use cattle. Dust storms are a natural thing. They've been always going on. And we've heard in a couple of the talks actually about the Dust Bowl and some others. This was just 3 weeks ago in Mongolia, and we were having a conference there. I'll tell you more about that in a minute too. But all of a sudden, you could see this dust storm coming. And I went through 3 dust storms in 10 days in Mongolia. Now, there's a belief by the people, and I believe it's true, that this desertification that's going on in the country, like I showed you, is enhancing that. But there's always been there. The Gobi Desert is famous for it for a long time ago, Marco Polo days even. But it is a really big challenge. The land condition and the weather conditions in this continental climate are very different. Now, lifestyles are also changing rapidly. I took this picture on the left, way out on the eastern steppe, which is where I do most of my work in Mongolia. And that is definitely the traditions that is ongoing and is still dominant. But with aid programs from Europe and America, almost every family now has a truck or a motorcycle. Now, we should all want them to have a great life with all the amenities they can do, and we hope that that life evolves in a way that really supports conservation. But what it does is bring up some really new and interesting challenges. What kid doesn't like to chase wildlife? All right? But when you've been doing it on horseback or on foot, you don't go very far, and the wildlife does. But when you've got a motorcycle, the whole world changes. So the ones who don't want wolves to be around no longer have to chase them or worry about their weapons. It's like a .22 rifle that's been bent 3 or 4 times, most of them. But all of a sudden now, especially in the winter, you can run them down and tire them out till they can't run anymore and club them to death. The game has changed for wildlife. And I mentioned it earlier, there's a market for wildlife that never existed. All right, so the good and the bad of this. In 2004, the president of Mongolia went to New York City, and he had heard about the Nature Conservancy, and they were not implementing this protected lands policy, and he called up the New York Nature Conservancy office and asked, I need to talk to you. And so they met with him, of course, and that's how the conversation got started. That was a call you didn't want to turn down. All right. One person from the office from the New York program, Susan Antonin, worked in Long Island. So there's another case. How on earth did she get going to Mongolia? But she worked in Long Island. She went out there for 2 years and did biological recon. The reason we do that is we want to know, is it possible to do what we think needs to be done? We also did the business recon, the due diligence and all that, and people went over, is this a government that's not so corrupt that we can't do business? Is it, all of those things that we need to do. And then in 2005, and this is where a younger me and our team from several states in the Nature Conservancy and with the World Wildlife Fund teamed up together and presented to the government what we call it conservation by design. It's the way the Nature Conservancy did work. And what we were trying to say is your protected area system needs to have a design. It needs to be purposeful. And we would argue, of course, as biologists, representative and make sure there's not too much duplication or just all the rocks and ice and mountains. So that conference worked out pretty well. Unfortunately, that Ministry of Nature and Environment leadership was the corrupt ones who leased out all the country shortly thereafter. But I guess they figured we had design once they set the pattern out there. And that's caused a lot of consternation. But it was a pretty interesting meeting. So remember that I said earlier that 10 years ago, this month, is when that meeting occurred. And so everything I'm going to tell you now has happened in 10 years. There's the due diligence we were talking about. It's kind of the context, donors, business, government, and partners. We all work with them. The Asia Foundation, we've got good information. Something few people know because we always think we had the first national park, and Argentina thinks they had the first one. This is the oldest one I know of. In 1778, the first national park. And it's still there. It's got real challenges, but it's right behind the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. Talk about having an educational environment. If you want to take your kids out, there's a great big national park right next door, which, by the way, the same thing happens in Nairobi. Nairobi National Park is right next to it. What a wonderful design for a city. The goal, I said that was currently at 14%. It's now at 17%, and that's what we and the World Wildlife Fund like to say is the 3% we've added. Now, 3% is about 4 million acres, so it's a significant amount. 2 Yellowstones. Huge investments in mining and energy, the modernization of business, and government accountability were issues that we uncovered. We did our due diligence and decided that we could, in fact, do something. So we committed. We knew there was a high priority conservation need. There were high threats. There's a great book on the silent wildlife crisis, if you want to look it up. It talks about what's really going on out there in terms of that problem with poaching. Opportunities in science and policy and conservation planning. Due diligence was that there was a real business opportunity. The mining companies have a lot of money, and if they're willing to put some money behind compensating somewhat for what they're doing, that's a real opportunity. And then an unbelievably committed team in Mongolia. Unbelievably committed. About 2/3 of all the people in Parliament grew up in a tent. Now, if we all had that connection to nature, how would we respond in making policy is maybe a really interesting question for us to think First strategies, assess the conservation status. It's part of conservation by design. What are the things that are of value out there? What's their current status? What would you like them to be? What is stopping you from getting there? And what you're going to do about it? And then how are you going to know you got there? That's basically conservation by design. We knew we wanted to increase the protected areas. It's already in their policy. So if we could enhance their ability to do that in a way that better protected the people and the nature that lives there, that's great. Manage these areas for success. They can't just designate them as in an area. They need help, they need protection. The people that need to make a living in those areas need to be guided and to be supported when they're doing the right things. So we conducted a gap analysis, which is say what's protected and what's not. And we already knew this from the pictures, but too much rock and ice, not enough grasslands. We knew that, but we documented it. We laid it out really carefully for the government. We also then started doing eco-regional assessments so that there's a regional thing, saying, well, what would be the best places to protect out there? What's the most likely? And so we don't want conflict in this particular case with herders. Let's put them in places where there's no water because the herders need the water. Those kinds of analyses were coming out of this work. And this then is where we decided to put a foot down and call it an anchor site and really start. And my colleagues in Mongolia said this was a place that really had a lot of the characteristics we wanted. Tosun Kostai is a 1 million acre grassland piece wildlife reserve. And about half of it has water and herders, and the other half has no water, so no herders. And all of it has Mongolian gazelles, except where the herders are most dense. Has lots of other endangered species, lots of other things that are of interest for conservation purposes. And in a wildlife reserve, unlike some strictly protected areas, the people who live there can continue to live there. All right? So they can make their living there, and that's a good thing. So that was our demonstration site, our anchor site. And so one of the most fun assignments I ever had was to go over there in 2008 and do conservation planning. Well, conservation planning answers those questions I was talking about a few minutes ago at a local scale. But this was where we had federal officials, state officials, herders, which by the way I got to tell you in a second what a fantastic system of debate they have. And it was all outside. One of the participants, he was head of a little local NGO who really believed in this place, but there's no visitors. It's way too far out. It took 7 hours of driving on a dirt track just to get to this place. All right, and so there's almost no visitors ever come, but they got a little NGO and a building and a house, and you can stay in some tents out there. They probably used them once or twice every 2 years. But the herders, and we sat out there, and we put up tarps, and we ate the food of the local people, and we toasted with vodka whenever we made a good decision and felt like it was good. So it was a really great experience, and we had, so for about 8 days, and then 2 weeks later we came back for another 8 days, and all these people came together and came up with a conservation plan. It's the first time it's been done in that part of the world, and it's being implemented. In fact, they liked it so much that they got a collaborative group of people to get together and say, okay, Nature Conservancy, we want you to lead this for the first time, but we all, local governments, there are these 5 counties kind of come together right there. They created an administrative body that to this day still makes decisions on how you manage this place. The science is coming in from us and Wildlife Conservation Society, World Wildlife Fund. Electricity is a little bit of a problem out there. So to put all this in the computer, it was a really interesting feat, and so we had a generator that would run for a little while sometimes, but we were in there at candlelight at night just trying to work these things, fighting off the mosquitoes. There's a little pond nearby. And with this is the kind of process that we came up with. You can see some of the conservation targets. The wolves are out there, beautiful grasslands. The marmot there, I said I was going to tell you the story about their debating, so I'll come back to that one. But the marmots, like woodchuck, you have those here, right? Yeah. They live on the grasslands, not up in the mountains and the rocks, just like our woodchucks do. But they're much bigger than our woodchuck, and so they're sort of like prairie dogs in that way. There used to be millions and millions until the Russians ran out of sable for their boots and other parts of their decorative fur that they could use on their clothes, and so they started paying the Mongolians. Well, they shot out 98% of it. And now it's in rare and endangered species, and all that happened in the late 80s. They just really wiped them out. But anyway, you can see the kinds of results. It was really an exciting time. This is the United States ambassador came with us for the second session. He took an interest in this project. This is a gentleman who was very excited. His son was the first Mongolian to go into Iraq with the Americans. So he was just so proud of that. He also went to California in an exchange that was hosted by the Nature Conservancy a few years later. And you should have seen his eyes seeing that ocean first time out of the country. This is the session, and so I'll tell you real quickly about the debate. I don't know, I do not understand, but something would come up about fire or grazing or wolves or something, and there would be 7 to 10 people talking all at the same time, and then all of a sudden, okay, here's what we want to do. I don't even know how they could hear each other talking. And so we were diligently recording. And here's an interesting thing. More often than not, the final arbiter, or at least the one who reported it out, was the woman. That's an interesting sociological thing because women have a very strong role. Half of Parliament is women. So it's a really different. So this is our group taking the picture. This is the celebration meal. You'll love this one. They've taken some kind of a torch, propane torch, take all the hair off the goat's head, and they cook it up and serve it like that. So anyway, it's a great thing. You know, you're really lucky, I suppose, if you get the eyelids. This was just in our tent with us. We had guests all the time. But it was really exciting time. But the importance of it is that in that country, everybody got to see that there was an opportunity for people to come together to make their decisions guided by some technology and some assistance. And it's similar to the African program in that way, where they are making the decisions about what needs to happen in there to make it work for them. And it's really been a powerful thing. It leveraged new money. We bought them a truck. They'd never had a vehicle out there before. They had a motorcycle, 1 Ranger for 1 million acres, now get this, and 3 months of fuel. So what are you going to do with that? So we made sure that they got a truck. We made sure they got 6 motorcycles. The Wildlife Conservation Society has a wonderful ranger training program, so they train the rangers. They're not armed. They have no power of arrest. They can only give a ticket. They can confiscate traps and things that are illegal. But it was pretty fascinating. Here we are. They were so excited. This is the first time he'd ever had a cell phone. You know what he did first thing? Called his wife. She had a cell phone. It was really fascinating, but they were so excited, and they said, we are the best equipped rangers in all of Mongolia. It was really great. So there we are, there's the celebration that we had, and I'll tell you also the weather in that place was amazing. We were there on the first week of June, and whatever that year was to celebrate this, and the temperature was about 28 degrees in the morning when we woke up, and the wind was blowing about 70 miles an hour. So it's an interesting climate.
How many rangers now?
6 rangers, and they're trained and they come and go. But there's been 4 of the 6 who have been there the whole time. And Armara, who used to be in the army there, he's another person. He loves everything out there. He loves it, and he's the chief ranger, and he's always in camo, and he's always walking like this, but he's a pussycat, except if those rangers do something wrong. He is on. So anyway, it's really interesting guy. He's the lead ranger. I'm hoping he doesn't ever retire. The bottom line is now there was a framework. It's been tested, and they liked it. That kind of planning, it has various names, but it's generated by a group of people, of colleagues all over, from many different institutions, and it's called the Open Standards. The Open Standards planning is a structured way of thinking and decision making that really provides a lot of foundation for your decisions. This is the first country we know of that put it into law. And what they put into law is not that everybody out there has to do this, but it was that for every protected area, there will be an open standards quality plan done with and by the people, and that will be what manages that protected area. That's how we will allocate that. That was so powerful. This is a real model for the world to have a country actually go that far and imagine that. So that anytime a new state park or anything like that comes about, the management plan is done through a rigorous process that brings strategy to the table very differently than just everybody coming trying to figure it out what they want to do. It's a very structured approach, but also very open to many different kinds of values, not just the ones that I might think are most important. I think I'm going to skip over that particular one. The Nature Conservancy then went into a strategic planning process about this because we had to think differently about it. I mean, that's the entire planning team, and only half of those are members of the staff there. And that is for 5 Kansas, 8 people. All right? That's a pretty impressive thing. But they have a great business plan. They are depending on a lot of different things. Here's some of the, here's what fell out of that though. All of a sudden the government said, okay, Nature Conservancy, you brought this to us now. Go do all these plans. We got about a year. Well, the number of protected areas is on the order of 65. In 3 years, they got 49 done. All right? But they were quickly done, and they know that they need to be done better. But here's the kind of process, and look at this. This is for one of the protected areas that people all got together and did that. This is an older slide, but you can see all the ones where it's been implemented are in the stars at that particular point in time. Now that's up to 40. So all these little ones all over the place are included in that as well. This is called Conservation Action Planning, and only Mongolians could lie down in the snow in the middle of the winter and actually spell it out and take a picture of themselves. I mean, they really celebrate this stuff. It's really fantastic. They're so excited about it. But we do have a really limited capacity. Those are the 2 people in the Nature Conservancy who've taken this on. Gala Davatrik and Tugudor, right there. Gala and Tugi, for those of us who don't speak Mongolian. All right, but these are the heart and the soul. And these people are so committed to seeing their country turn out as best as it can be. And they have no illusions that it will always be right, that it's going to be perfect. They know there's going to be highways and fences and other things out there, but they are so committed. And Gala grew up in a tent where snow leopards and the equivalent of their bighorn sheep, the Argali, if you know that one, which is about twice as tall as our bighorn sheep. Ibex, all those animals live. He remembers that, but he didn't know to love it until he came to the United States and got real statistics on what was happening in his country and could find out that it wasn't going to stay that way. He didn't know he loved it so much, and now the guy is passionate. He can't sing, but he'll ask his friends to sing about all the traditional songs that talk about nature. I mean, this is something to think about. Until 15 years ago, they didn't have headsets and CDs and whatever. It's current streaming things across that they could listen to. All of the music in Mongolia was traditionally passed on from mother and father to kids, right on down like that. And to this day, if you go out with these herders and drivers and sit out on there once before you go to bed, especially if they've had a little bit of vodka, everybody starts to sing. It's a competition. Okay, you sing this one, and you sing that one, and they can still do it. There's about 70 or 80 songs that they all know. Very interesting. They're really passionate. But this is what happened 3 weeks ago when we were there. Gala and Tugi said, we're exhausted. We know this is important. So rather than have us go around and do all this, we need to train the trainers. And so with my friend John Morrison from World Wildlife Fund, I and Gala and Tugi, we went over there and we trained 28 new people who are now not just going to be doing these conservation action plans, but they're responsible for going out and developing teams to train more people. And the idea is that in the next 10 years, we'll have over 150 people who are trainers who can actually do and implement these and redo these plans as they go. It was a very exciting time. So here's the bottom line. There's nothing... sometimes these things just seem to fall out of the sky, how things fell all together. But there were some really good people involved with this. But when you think about conservation by design, it makes so much sense. And to the Mongolians who still had so much intact and the future is in front, and at least many of them don't want to do what other countries have done and squandered their natural resources and then try to fix it at the end. When they've got so much of it left, they did want to design it, and so that's what came out of it. So they started saying, with all that, what's protected, what's not protected, what are our species and biggest needs, where's representation to make sure we've got all the habitats included in here and not just one or two. We helped them do this design which now then, it covers the remainder of the entire country now. And it shows a vision for success that's got the science behind it and the buy-in from the scientific community. I mean, the Academy of Sciences is involved in this. Can you imagine our Academy of Sciences getting involved in eco-regional planning? It's not really what we do, but in this country, it's what they do. And they've got all the academics behind it. And what this is a vision for conservation success. It's a vision that if we can do that, we know that we'll have the good pieces left. And then there's still all the in-between stuff that they want to hold the mining companies accountable for not messing it up. I mean, they're going to mess it up while they're doing it, but they're going to clean it up, and they're developing those policies now. It's not, that's a little more of a competitive environment. This particular area in Mongolia is right on the China border. You turn that way in this picture, you can actually see 2 miles away the guard posts on the China border. There's nice big 2 fences. Each side has their fences. The Chinese are the only ones that have enough people to staff it. This is called Goodman Mountain. It has a long history. But it's a traditional journey that Mongolians often take, especially if they lived in the grasslands, because this goes back all the way to Manchurian times when the Manchurians came in, stole horses from the Mongolians, and the Mongolians were upset and they went over there and stole the horses back. And then this is a big area of old craters. And they hid the horses in the craters while the Manchurians went all over. They could see them from the hilltop looking for it. And so what people do now is they take their kids up here. You can see this is a pretty nice protected area. The grass looks pretty good out there. It's like tall grass prairie right next to the Gobi Desert. But they take their kids up there and they go to sunrise to the top of the mountain. And most of them are Buddhists, so they toss a little vodka or something on them and they take a little shot. Not the kids, I'm sure. But they celebrate, and then they just walk through and enjoy the grasses and the wildflowers. They look across that vast landscape, and you can still hear wolves calling out there at night. So there's still that. There's not many herders. There's not much surface water, so there's not many herders in that area. It's called Goodman Mountain, and it's a great tradition. So people take their kids out there, and basically this is in the guard shack of a national park where that wild horse is, the Taki. And I just found out that this young girl was it was in 2008 when I was there when I took that picture. She's now in college in Ulaanbaatar. And they go to college a little younger than I did. But nonetheless, it's just emblematic of the idea. She went everywhere with her daddy. And on the back of that motorcycle, patrolling that national park, going to watch out for those horses. When one of the young horses died, she was right there with him the whole time. That's that touch in nature, that heart and that soul and the vision that these kids will have that will move protection forward in Mongolia. It's a really hopeful place. It's got real problems. I don't want to make any illusions about it. If you drive in from the airport now, you see big signs with all the lipstick and perfume and big trucks and cars and all of that's there. But there's no road for them. They're just driving around the capital city. Right. But there will be a paved highway really soon going all the way to China and all the way to Moscow. There's going to be that. There's going to be a railroad, a new railroad going. There's going to be this stuff there. But now my colleagues would say we have hope that even with those things, we'll be able to sustain the lifestyle and the life that's with it. So thank you very much. Any questions? I'll be glad to try. All right, I did a good job. The question is, what's the diet? And it's a vegan's nightmare. Yeah, it's basically the herders have a tiny bit of flour that they get, trading usually in a couple of places, and with that they make noodles. And so in the morning they usually get up and have, at least on the eastern half of the country, they have a little bit of black tea which is shaved off of a block. They add some milk from whatever animal is available at that particular point in time, and salt. So it's salty black tea with milk. And they have a little bit of a noodle soup. And then that's pretty much it until later in the day they'll come back, often at night, and they have dried meat like jerky. That's when they kill an animal. They just strip it all inside the tent, lovely. And it's just hanging all over, but it dries very quickly, but very correctly. They have a special way to do it. And so they'll have some soup out of that, or they'll pound it and make something like a pemmican. They use wild garlics and herbs to season with. Occasionally, they will pick up some kind of a vegetable that's in the market, but most of the places have no markets close by at all. So it's really a carnivorous diet. My favorite dish that they fix, and it's usually for celebrations, is they call it hot rocks in English. And basically they have little milk cans and they've sealed them off and they've got a valve on top of them, so they cook rocks, put those in, pour in some water, put some meat, some more rocks, some more meat, onions, and all that in there. Go out and herd all day and then come back and you've got a nice stew. It's like a crock pot. So that's some of that is the way. So that's basically the diet. It's over and over and over. They do have fermented mare's milk. They make a little beer that's out of mare's milk. Everything's out of mare's milk, I think. And they have the only beverage I didn't like over there was mare's milk vodka. It's like vodka with cheesy. That one I couldn't get. The rest of them I was okay with. So, any other questions? Yes.
What kind of minerals are they digging for over there?
It's pretty much everything, sedimentary. Most of it's sedimentary. You've heard probably about some of the dinosaur fossil types of things from there. This is the place where they have, thousands of acres of just dinosaur eggs sticking up out of the ground, fossils, obviously. So a lot of the typical sedimentary types of things: coal, oil and gas, uranium, gold. Some silver, though, that's not too big right here, but when they get up into the Altai Mountains, they'll find that. And a few other odds and ends minerals, some of the precious metals that are in there. There's one bauxite mine, for example, from an Australian firm that's managing that. I want to be honest about it, though. Right now, you saw where they've leased out the land, but if you actually flew over it, you'll see problems. There are big coal mines in a couple of places, but you can drive for a very long way without ever seeing any of that. What you're more likely to come across now is one of these giant trucks. Imagine just giant 18-wheelers hauling whatever material going across Konza. That's what you see more and more. And it's usually a 2-track going right by. And then if you go there long enough, you'll find a dead gazelle or something nearby where somebody shot it, or to stop for a lunch or something like that. So that's the kind of fragmentation we're getting.
What's the average height of a mature man?
Average height is going to be fairly small. I would say about 5'7", 5'8". All I know is they have their stirrups up way high on the horse, and they don't sit on the saddle, they stand when they ride. And when I got on there at my height and stood up, I was so far above that saddle, I was scared to death. But also I found out how men can sing falsetto when you sit down on the saddle. So it was an interesting 2-hour ride for me, and that was about all. After that I walked.
The horses they ride are different from the wild horses, right?
That's correct.
And how many wild horses are there, have been reintroduced? What's the herd size?
I think of all the wild horses, there's one herd in the Gobi. Can't remember exactly what that other place is called. Let's see, 400, 600. There's only about 800 horses in the wild.
Yeah.
If there's still zoos have them, and a few other private people have them around the world, but that's it. And they are different. It's the only untamed true horse genus, undomesticated one. It's a pretty fascinating. You can see the animals. It's bulky. They've got all the right behavior, but their voice is very different. So it's a pretty fascinating animal. Now the Mongolian ponies, or what they call it Mongolian ponies, the horses over there, are amazing. Their tenacity, they can run for a very long time. In fact, at the Nodam Festival, it's their equivalent of the Olympics. There's 3 events: archery, wrestling, and horseback riding. And the horseback riding is a 23-kilometer race over the prairie. And there are thousands of those people, and those horses don't stop the entire time. So figure that's about 10 miles straight out. They're pretty good. Several times Arabians have been brought over there to compete. They don't compete. Not across the grasslands. So these little ponies are good.
What's the weight of the horse?
I don't really know.
How tall are they?
Let's see. That. Yeah. It was the stirrups that were my problem. We got one back where? Oh, here we are, yes.
How's the fire? Do they set their own fire? Do they just wait for lightning strikes or?
They don't like fire. They're, you know, with no infrastructure, there's no management of fire, although now a lot of them do have trucks with little, you know, the little paddles and things, which is kind of amusing to me, thinking about how big that country is, no roads or anything. But fire is common. I've flown across the country several times in helicopters and airplanes, just going from one place to the other. I have never gone across that I didn't see a live fire. This past winter, it must have been a man-caused or vehicle-caused fire, but that wildlife reserve, 800,000 of the 1,000,000 acres burned in 3 days. All right. Nobody was worried about the grass because it'll come back in the spring, and the wetter areas where all the tents generally are without, they didn't have enough grass to burn the fuel, or enough fuel to burn. But there were about 13,000 livestock that were killed. Interestingly, no Mongolian gazelles were found dead. I wonder which ones are better able to deal with fire. Yeah, but that's how big the fires are. That was just on the reserve, so that fire had a massive area way beyond that. So basically, the bottom line is in the grasslands, 1 million to 2 million acre fires are common. Common meaning every few years you'll get some. And smaller fires are all over the place. So, but people don't set fires. Any more? Well, I hope you've had a little bit of an introduction to Mongolia. It's a special place. I will say this, if you do want to go, it's a good time to go in the sense, one, it's very reasonably priced when you get there. You should make arrangements to have some help getting around. There's no real good road map to the country.
There's no roads.
It's all 2 tracks, so it's like a highway. And these guys, if you make sure you've got a guide who knows how to guide. I would say one thing about the service sector in this country, it's not there yet. If you hire a driver and say, I want to go to Tosunustai, which now, even though there's partially a paved road, still takes about 5.5 or 6 hours, you will not stop even if the wildlife is jumping in front of your car. Their job is to get you there and that's it. There's no wildlife interpretation. So, but it's a wonderful time to go. It's a great people. They will invite you into their tent. They will feed you the last food they've got if that's the way it is. I'll say this one other thing. 98% of the Mongolians graduate from high school. Think about that. 98%. All right, now part of that's from their Soviet culture, where they were forced to go to school. They had to. And they've kept it up, though, when they had a choice. Here's the other thing. When you get in a tent, and this was one of the most amazing experiences for me. So I sit in the tent for the first couple of times. I read all my things about the rules. You don't trip over the threshold or you're going to have to kill you, things like that. It brings bad luck on the whole family. So I was very cautious. I'm not that graceful. And we sat down, though, and the first thing you do is you ask about the animal. How are your animals? And translators, of course, and helping us understand. The second thing, you can ask about, the food. How's the food? Everything's going all right. And then finally, you can ask about the family. That's the third thing in line. And then the first thing they asked me, what do you think it was? All this drying, do you think it's due to climate change? The next question was, well, what's this up with President Bush? How do you think he's doing? So, informed people, I don't know how they get that. Now many of them do have a little radio or something that they have most of them have a little solar panel about this big outside their tent. And they can run an electric razor or charge a flashlight or something like that. But anyway, so it's a wonderful people, it's a wonderful time. You can still see unbelievable things in a landscape, and they are choosing how to shape their landscape, and I think that's an amazing thing. So thank you.